Christmas Eve should be about family, warmth and hope. But for one little girl digging through trash behind a restaurant, it was just another night of survival. Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy: a mansion, luxury cars, and a business empire worth millions. He was driving home from his Christmas party when he spotted her small figure hunched over a dumpster, her coat no match for the bitter cold. Most people would have driven past, maybe felt sympathy, then forgotten by morning. But something about her quiet determination, the way she searched through debris, stopped him cold. What Marcus did next would not only transform both their lives forever, but challenge everything society believes about wealth, poverty and giving. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Wellington pulled his Mercedes into the circular driveway of his Beacon Hill mansion, the engine's purr barely audible above the wind howling through the bare December trees. The Christmas party at the Ritz-Carlton had been everything he expected: polished conversation, calculated networking, and the hollow ring of forced laughter that echoed through ballrooms filled with Boston's elite. He sat for a moment in the leather driver's seat, staring at the towering Georgian facade of his home, its windows glowing warmly against the night sky, yet somehow failing to invite him in. At 52, Marcus had built an empire from nothing. Wellington Properties owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Boston, managed luxury apartment complexes across New England, and had recently expanded into sustainable housing developments that were revolutionizing urban planning. The business magazines called him a visionary, a self-made success story that embodied the American dream. Yet sitting in his driveway on Christmas Eve, surrounded by the fruits of 3 decades of relentless ambition, he felt more alone than he had since childhood. His fingers found the familiar weight of his father's gold pocket watch in his vest pocket, a habit that had become second nature during moments of reflection. James Wellington had carried this watch through 43 years of construction work, rising at dawn each morning to build other people's dreams while nurturing his own son's aspirations. Marcus could still hear his father's weathered voice. "Son, success ain't about what you accumulate, it's about what you contribute. Money's just a tool, but character is the blueprint." The watch had been James's only valuable possession when he died 15 years ago, leaving behind a legacy measured not in dollars, but in the respect of every man who had ever worked alongside him. Marcus had built his fortune on those foundation stones of integrity and hard work, but somewhere along the way, the tool had become the master, and the blueprint had gotten lost beneath layers of profit margins and quarterly reports. The divorce. Papers had been finalized 2 months ago. Patricia had taken half of everything, which still left him with more money than most people could spend in several lifetimes. But she had also taken something far more valuable: the illusion that success could substitute for connection. Their marriage had been more business partnership than love affair. 2 ambitious people building parallel lives that occasionally intersected at charity galas and vacation homes. The split had been amicable, professional even, which somehow made it more devastating than if they had fought. Patricia had wanted children once, years ago, but Marcus had always found reasons to delay. First, the business needed more attention. Then, the economy required careful navigation. Later, they were traveling too much. The timing wasn't right. They should wait until next year. Next year had become next decade. And eventually, Patricia stopped asking. Now, at 52, Marcus wondered if those postponed dreams had been the foundation cracks that finally brought down their marriage. The December wind rattled his car windows, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow and the distant sound of Christmas carols from a nearby church service. Marcus had no family left. His father gone, his mother lost to cancer when he was 30, no siblings, no children. The house staff would be with their own families tonight, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the echo of his footsteps on marble floors. 8 blocks away, in an abandoned warehouse district that urban developers had forgotten and city planners had written off, Zara huddled beneath layers of salvaged cardboard and threadbare blankets. At 8 years old, she had learned that survival required constant vigilance, careful planning, and the ability to make herself invisible when necessary. The abandoned textile factory where she slept had been condemned 3 years ago, but the demolition crew had never arrived, leaving behind a hollow concrete shell that provided shelter from wind and rain, though little protection from the cold. Zara's world had contracted to a 5-block radius since her mother died 6 months ago. She knew which dumpsters behind which restaurants yielded the most food, which police officers walked, which beats at what times, and which doorways provided temporary warmth when the Atlantic wind cut through the city like a blade. She had learned to read the faces of strangers, distinguishing between those who might offer genuine help and those whose assistance came with expectations she couldn't afford to meet. Her mother had been Sarah Williams, though few people had known her full name during the final years when illness had stripped away everything but her love for her daughter. Sarah had worked 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night and stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day, fighting a losing battle against medical bills that multiplied faster than her minimum wage paychecks could cover them. When the cancer came, swift and merciless, it took not only Sarah's life, but also their small apartment, their meager savings, and every safety net that had kept them housed and fed. The social services people had come around after Sarah's funeral, asking questions about relatives and next of kin. But Zara had hidden until they left. She had heard too many stories from other homeless children about foster homes and group facilities, about siblings separated and families divided by well-meaning bureaucrats who measured care in case loads rather than love. Her mother's last coherent words had been about staying strong, staying together, though together now meant just Zara and the memories she carried like precious cargo. Tonight, Christmas Eve, the city seemed especially cruel in its contrasts. Through the warehouse's broken windows, Zara could see the warm glow of apartment buildings where families gathered around dinner tables and Christmas trees. The sounds of celebration drifted on the winter air, laughter, music, the innocent joy of children who had never wondered where their next meal would come from, or whether tomorrow would bring warmth or only more cold. Hunger had become her constant companion, a gnawing presence that had taught her to distinguish between the sharp pangs of immediate need and the deeper ache of prolonged emptiness. Her last real meal had been 2 days ago, when a kind woman at a soup kitchen had given her extra bread and a container of soup that Zara had stretched across several meals. Since then, she had survived on scraps and the occasional apple from a corner store owner who pretended not to notice when food occasionally went missing. The teddy bear clutched against her chest had been her mother's final gift, purchased with the last $5 from Sarah's purse during their final week together. Brown and worn, with one eye missing and stuffing leaking from multiple seams, the bear held the faint scent of her mother's perfume, a drugstore fragrance that had somehow managed to smell like love and safety. Zara pressed her face against the bear's matted fur, whispering the bedtime stories her mother used to tell, keeping alive the voice that had once made even their worst days bearable. The restaurant district 6 blocks south had become her hunting ground after dark, when the dinner rush ended and the kitchens discarded their daily surplus. Zara had learned which establishments threw away food that was still edible, and which ones soaked their waste with bleach to prevent scavenging. She knew the timing of garbage collection, the schedules of security guards, and the unspoken rules that governed the nighttime economy of survival. As Christmas Eve deepened into its final hours, both Marcus and Zara prepared for another sleepless night, though for vastly different reasons. Marcus would lie awake in his king-size bed, surrounded by luxury but haunted by emptiness, wondering when success had stopped feeling like victory. Zara would curl beneath her cardboard shelter, clutching her teddy bear and planning tomorrow's search for food, each breath visible in the freezing air as she whispered prayers to a mother who could no longer answer. Neither could have imagined that their worlds would collide in just a few hours, or that a moment of unexpected connection would transform them both in ways that neither wealth nor poverty had managed to achieve. The city slept around them, 10 million souls pursuing their separate dreams, while fate quietly arranged the circumstances that would prove Marcus's father right, that success truly was about contribution, and that sometimes the most valuable treasures are found in the most unexpected places. Marcus had driven these streets for 20 years without truly seeing them. The warehouse district existed in his peripheral vision, a necessary bridge between his Beacon Hill mansion and the downtown office towers where his empire operated. Tonight, however, something drew him off his usual route. Perhaps it was the restlessness that had been building all evening, or the way the Christmas party's artificial warmth had left him feeling more isolated than before. Whatever the reason, he found himself turning down Congress Street, then taking a left onto a narrow road that dead-ended at the old textile district. The Mercedes's headlights swept across abandoned loading docks and broken windows, illuminating a landscape of urban decay that most of Boston's residents preferred to forget existed. Marcus was preparing to turn around when his lights caught movement near a restaurant dumpster. A small figure hunched against the cold, methodically searching through discarded refuse. At first glance, he assumed it was an adult experiencing homelessness, a sight that had become increasingly common in Boston's side streets. But as he drove closer, the figure's size and movements registered in his consciousness with jarring clarity. This was a child alone on Christmas Eve, searching for food in a dumpster, while the rest of the city celebrated in warm homes with full tables. Marcus pulled to the curb and sat in his car for several long minutes, engine running, heated seats, warming his back while he watched the small figure work with systematic efficiency. The child wore a coat several sizes too large, the hood pulled up against the wind, but even bundled in layers of oversized clothing, the delicate frame and careful movements clearly belonged to someone very young. The weight of his father's pocket watch seemed to grow heavier in his vest as Marcus wrestled with his conscience. The practical voice in his head, the same voice that had built his business empire, whispered about liability, about getting involved in situations beyond his expertise, about the complexity of social services and child welfare laws. But underneath those rational concerns, a deeper voice spoke with his father's cadence. When you see someone in need, son, you don't walk away calculating the costs. You step up and do what's right. Marcus turned off the engine and stepped into the bitter December night. His Italian leather shoes crunched on frost-covered concrete as he approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in the gentlest tone he could manage. "Excuse me," he called softly. "Are you all right?" The child spun around with startling speed, and Marcus found himself looking into the face of a young black girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with eyes that held far too much wariness for someone so small. She clutched something against her chest, what appeared to be a stuffed animal, and took several quick steps backward, maintaining distance between them. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said, chin lifted with defensive dignity. "This is public property, and the food was thrown away. Nobody wants it." The formality of her speech surprised Marcus. Despite her circumstances, she spoke with careful grammar and clear articulation, suggesting an education that had been interrupted but not forgotten. "I'm not suggesting you're doing anything wrong," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady and non-threatening. "I just noticed you were out here alone and it's very cold tonight. Are you hungry?" The girl's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Are you police?" "No, I'm not police. My name is Marcus." He gestured toward his car. "I was driving home and saw you searching for food. I thought maybe I could help." "I don't need help," she said quickly, but her stomach chose that moment to emit a loud growl that contradicted her words. Color rose in her cheeks, and she pressed the stuffed animal tighter against her body. Marcus felt his heart constrict at the sound. When was the last time this child had eaten a proper meal? "What's your name?" She hesitated for a long moment, clearly debating whether to answer. Finally, she said, "Zara." "Zara, that's a beautiful name. Are you out here by yourself? Where are your parents?" The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus watched as Zara's carefully constructed composure wavered, her lower lip trembling slightly before she regained control. "My mama died 6 months ago." The simple statement carried a weight that nearly staggered Marcus. This child had been surviving alone on the streets for half a year. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Zara. What about other family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles?" Zara shook her head. "Just me and Mama. She said we only had each other, but we were enough." Her voice caught slightly on the last word. Marcus felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. The dignity with which this little girl carried herself, the way she spoke of her mother with such love, despite her current circumstances, reminded him powerfully of his own childhood. His mother had possessed that same fierce protectiveness, that same determination to maintain dignity in the face of hardship. "Zara, there's a diner about 3 blocks from here that stays open all night. Would you let me buy you dinner? A hot meal, maybe some soup to warm you up?" "I don't take charity," Zara replied with startling firmness. "Mama taught me that we earn what we get." The response nearly broke Marcus's heart. Here was a child who had been alone on the streets for months, clearly hungry and cold, yet still maintaining the pride her mother had instilled in her. "It wouldn't be charity. You could tell me about your mama while we eat. I lost my parents, too. And sometimes it helps to talk about the people we miss." Something in his tone seemed to reach her. Zara studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions in the dim streetlight. Finally, she reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small, crumpled photograph. "This is us," she said, holding the image toward him with trembling fingers. "From last Christmas." Marcus stepped closer, careful not to make any sudden movements, and looked at the photograph. Even in the poor light, he could see a beautiful young woman with Zara's same intelligent eyes, both of them smiling at the camera in what appeared to be a small apartment decorated with modest Christmas decorations. The woman, Zara's mother, wore a grocery store uniform, and though the apartment was clearly humble, both mother and daughter radiated happiness. "She was beautiful," Marcus said softly. "She looks like she loved you very much." "She did." Zara's voice was barely above a whisper. "She worked 2 jobs to take care of me, but then she got sick, and the doctors couldn't make her better, and the medicine cost too much money, and—" Her words tumbled together as tears finally began to flow. Marcus knelt down on the cold concrete, bringing himself to Zara's eye level. "I'm sure she did everything she could to take care of you, and I bet she'd want you to be safe and warm and fed right now." Zara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. "The social workers came after the funeral, but I hid. I heard stories about kids who got split up and never saw each other again. Mama always said we had to stay together." "You're very brave," Marcus said, and meant it completely. "Your mama raised you to be strong and independent, but being strong doesn't mean you can't accept help when you need it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone care about you." After a long moment, Zara nodded slowly. "Okay, but I pay you back someday." "Mama always said debts should be honored." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had felt in months. "Deal. But first, let's get you somewhere warm." As they walked toward his car, Zara clutching her teddy bear and the precious photograph, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since his father was alive. He didn't yet understand the full significance of this moment, but he knew with absolute certainty that walking away was no longer an option. The Bell's Diner sat like a beacon of warmth on the corner of Harrison Avenue, its neon sign flickering cheerfully against the dark December sky. Inside, the late-night crowd was sparse, a few shift workers grabbing coffee between jobs, an elderly couple sharing pie and quiet conversation, and now Marcus and Zara sliding into a corner booth beneath, the soft glow of vintage light fixtures. Zara had remained quiet during the short drive, her teddy bear positioned carefully on her lap, while she studied Marcus with cautious eyes. The restaurant's warmth seemed to relax her slightly, though she still held herself with the alert posture of someone who had learned to be ready for anything. "Order whatever you want," Marcus said gently, sliding a laminated menu across the table. "When was the last time you had a hot meal?" Zara considered the question seriously. "Tuesday, maybe? There's a soup kitchen on Tremont Street, but they only serve 3 days a week." She opened the menu, her eyes widening at the choices. "I don't need much, maybe just soup." "How about we start with soup and see how you feel?" Marcus caught the waitress's attention. "Could we get a bowl of your chicken noodle soup, some hot chocolate, and maybe some of that homemade bread I smell?" As they waited for the food, Marcus watched Zara slowly begin to thaw in the restaurant's welcoming atmosphere. She carefully arranged her teddy bear on the seat beside her, then smoothed her hair back from her face with hands that, despite their cleanliness, showed the telltale signs of a hard life. Small cuts, chapped skin, nails bitten down to the quick. "You said your mother worked 2 jobs, Marcus prompted gently. Zara nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface. During the day, she stocked shelves at Murphy's Grocery on Washington Street. At night, she cleaned offices downtown. She'd leave me with Mrs. Rodriguez upstairs while she worked the night shift, then come home and sleep for a few hours before going to the grocery store." The waitress arrived with steaming bowls and a basket of fresh bread. Zara's eyes lit up at the sight of the food, but she waited politely, hands folded in her lap. "Go ahead," Marcus encouraged. "It's yours." The first spoonful of soup seemed to awaken something in Zara, not just hunger, but a memory of what normal meals felt like. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, occasionally pausing to tear off small pieces of bread and share them with her teddy bear in an unconscious gesture that made Marcus's chest tighten with emotion. "What happened when your mother got sick?" he asked, when Zara had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger. Zara's spoon stilled in her bowl. She started getting tired all the time. At first, she said it was just from working so much, but then she couldn't keep food down, and she kept losing weight. When she finally went to the doctor, he said it was already too late. Marcus had built his fortune understanding numbers, calculating risks and returns, but he couldn't begin to calculate the mathematics of a single mother choosing between medical care and rent, between medications and groceries for her child. "The treatments cost more than we had," Zara continued. "Even with insurance from the grocery store, there were all these other costs: parking at the hospital, taking time off work, medicines that weren't covered. We lost our apartment after 3 months. Mama kept saying she was going to get better, that we'd find another place, but—" Her voice trailed off. "But she didn't get better," Marcus finished softly. Zara shook her head, tears threatening again. "She tried so hard. Even when she was really sick, she kept working until the very end. She said she had to leave me something, some way to take care of myself." With trembling fingers, Zara reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, worn soft from repeated handling. "She wrote me this letter during her last week in the hospital." Marcus accepted the letter with the reverence it deserved, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was shaky but determined, the words penned by someone fighting against time and weakness to leave something precious behind. "My dearest Zara, if you're reading this, then I've gone to be with the angels, but I need you to know that I'm not really gone. I'm in every sunset you watch, every book you read, every time you help someone who needs it. I'm in your brave heart and your beautiful smile. I know you're scared, baby girl, but you are stronger than you know. You have a mind that can learn anything and a heart that can love without limits. Don't let anyone tell you that being poor makes you less valuable. You are precious beyond measure. I couldn't give you money or fancy things, but I gave you something better. I taught you to be kind, to be honest, and to never give up. These are treasures that no one can take away from you. Find people who see your light, Zara. There are good people in this world who will help you if you let them. Don't be too proud to accept love when it comes your way. I will love you forever. And always, Mama Marcus finished reading with tears streaming down his face. The letter represented everything beautiful about the human spirit. Love transcending circumstance, hope persisting in the face of hopelessness. A mother's final gift to her child being not material wealth, but the foundation for building a meaningful life. She sounds like an extraordinary woman, Marcus said, carefully refolding the letter and handing it back to Zara. She was the best mama in the world, Zara whispered, clutching the letter against her chest. I miss her so much it feels like I can't breathe sometimes. Marcus reached across the table and gently touched Zara's hand. I lost my mother when I was 30, and I still miss her every day. The missing never really goes away, but it does get easier to carry. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes while Zara finished her soup and hot chocolate. Finally, Marcus broached the subject that had been building in his mind since they sat down. Zara, I'd like to help you, not just tonight, but longer term. I can get you a hotel room where you'll be warm and safe while we figure out next steps. New clothes, regular meals, maybe get you back in school. Zara's eyes widened with a mixture of hope and fear. What do you want in return? The question broke Marcus's heart. This child had learned to view kindness with suspicion because her experience had taught her that everything came with a price. Nothing, Marcus said firmly. Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do. After a long moment, Zara nodded slowly. Okay, but just for tonight. I don't want to be a burden. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant's emergency line. Within an hour, they were standing in a modest but clean hotel room, Zara staring in wonder at the bed with its crisp white sheets, the bathroom with unlimited hot water, the thermostat that could make the room any temperature she wanted. As Marcus prepared to leave for the night, Zara called out softly, "Mr. Marcus? Thank you. Mama would say you're one of the good people she wrote about." Driving home through empty streets, Marcus felt something fundamental shifting inside him. For the first time in years, he had acted not as a businessman calculating returns, but as a human being responding to need. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and preparing to jump. Marcus arrived at the hotel the next morning, carrying shopping bags from Macy's children's department and a breakfast feast from a nearby cafe. He had barely slept, spending the night researching child welfare laws, foster care systems, and emergency guardianship procedures on his laptop. The complexity of the bureaucratic maze that separated homeless children from safety had left him both educated and frustrated. Zara answered his knock, wearing the hotel's oversized bathrobe, her hair damp from what had clearly been a long, luxurious shower. The transformation was remarkable. Clean, rested, and with some of the wariness replaced by cautious optimism. She looked like any other 8-year-old girl, rather than the street-hardened survivor he had met the night before. "I brought breakfast," Marcus announced, setting containers of pancakes, scrambled eggs, and fresh fruit on the small table by the window, "and some clothes that might fit better than that coat you were wearing." Zara's eyes widened as she examined the shopping bags, jeans in her size, sweaters, a proper winter coat with real insulation, socks, underwear, and a pair of sturdy sneakers. "This is too much," she said, though her fingers lingered on the soft fabric of a purple sweater. "It's not too much," Marcus replied firmly. "Every child deserves to be warm and comfortable." As Zara dressed in her new clothes, the first items that had actually belonged to her in 6 months, Marcus broached the subject that had kept him awake all night. "Zara, we need to talk about your situation long-term. A hotel room is temporary, but you need stability, education, proper care. I think we should contact Child Protective Services." The effect was immediate and devastating. Zara went rigid, the color draining from her face as she backed against the wall like a cornered animal. "No," she said, her voice sharp with panic. No social workers, no foster homes. They'll put me somewhere terrible, or with people who don't want me or split me up from... She stopped, realizing she was alone now, that there was no one left to be split up from. Zara, listen to me. No! The word came out as almost a scream. I've heard the stories. Kids who get bounced from house to house, never staying anywhere long enough to belong. People who take in foster kids for the money but don't really care about them. I won't go into the system. Marcus knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. I understand you're scared, but running away from help isn't the answer. What if I could ensure you went somewhere safe? What if I personally made sure... You don't understand, Zara interrupted, tears streaming down her face. You're rich. You have choices. Kids like me don't get choices. We get whatever adults decide to give us. The conversation haunted Marcus. As he drove to the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families office later that morning, the building was a study in institutional bleakness, grey walls, fluorescent lighting, and the perpetual aroma of coffee and bureaucratic resignation that seemed to permeate all government buildings. Linda Morrison, the caseworker assigned to handle Zara's situation, was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who carried herself with the weary competence of someone who had seen too many hard cases and not enough happy endings. She listened to Marcus's explanation with professional skepticism, occasionally jotting notes on a form that had clearly been photocopied too many times. So you found this child digging through a dumpster on Christmas Eve, took her to dinner, bought her clothes, and got her a hotel room, Morrison summarized, her tone suggesting this sequence of events raised more red flags than warm feelings. And now you want to what, exactly? I want to help her, Marcus replied, trying to keep frustration out of his voice. She's been living on the streets for 6 months. She needs safety, education, proper care. Morrison pulled out a business card and slid it across her desk. Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, Linda Morrison, MSW, with a phone number and email address that looked as bureaucratic as everything else in the building. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate your concern, but this child needs to be placed in state custody immediately. We have protocols, procedures, proper channels. You can't just take in a homeless child because you feel sorry for her. What's the alternative? Marcus asked. How long does it take to find her a placement? Morrison consulted a thick binder. On her desk. Our average placement time for children over age 6 is currently running about 8 to 12 weeks, assuming we can find an appropriate match. Older children are harder to place, and she'll need psychological evaluation, medical assessment, educational testing. 8 to 12 weeks? Marcus interrupted. What happens to her while she's waiting? Emergency foster placement or group home facility, depending on availability. The casual way Morrison discussed warehousing an 8-year-old girl like inventory waiting for distribution made Marcus's blood pressure rise. And if I wanted to apply to be her guardian, temporarily, until permanent placement can be found? Morrison's expression shifted from skeptical to openly suspicious. Mr. Wellington, you're a single man with no experience raising children, no training in dealing with traumatized youth, and no existing relationship with this child. Why exactly are you so interested in taking responsibility for her welfare? The implication stung because Marcus couldn't entirely answer it himself. Was this genuine compassion, or some misguided attempt to fill the void left by his divorce? Was he trying to rescue Zara, or was he trying to rescue himself? Because she needs help, he said simply, and I have the resources to provide it. Resources aren't enough, Morrison replied. Child welfare requires training, patience, specialized knowledge. Good intentions don't qualify someone to care for a traumatized child. By the time Marcus left the DCF office 2 hours later, he had filled out preliminary paperwork for emergency guardianship, provided financial statements that proved his ability to support a child, and scheduled the first of what would be many home visits, background checks, and psychological evaluations. The process would take a minimum of 6 weeks, Morrison had explained, assuming everything went smoothly and no complications arose. 6 weeks during which Zara would remain in state custody, bounced between emergency placements while bureaucrats processed forms and social workers wrote reports. That afternoon, Marcus met with his attorney, Robert Chen, whose family law practice had handled his divorce, and who possessed both legal expertise and the kind of practical wisdom that came from decades of navigating complex human situations. "Marcus, I need to ask you the same question that caseworker asked," Chen said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus thought about Zara clutching her teddy bear, about her mother's letter, about the dignity with which this child had endured 6 months of homelessness without losing her capacity for hope. "Because someone should," he said finally. "Because she deserves better than what the system has to offer. Because maybe this is why I worked so hard to build what I have. Not just to accumulate wealth, but to use it when it can actually matter." Chen nodded slowly. "The legal path is complicated but not impossible. Emergency guardianship followed by formal custody proceedings if you decide to make this permanent. But Marcus, once you start down this road, you can't change your mind when things get difficult. This child has already lost everything once." That evening, Marcus returned to the hotel with dinner and a chess set he had impulsively purchased. As they ate Chinese takeout and Marcus taught Zara the basic moves of the game, he watched her face light up with the joy of learning something new, of being treated like a child rather than a burden to be managed. "Mr. Marcus," she said, as he was preparing to leave, "are you really going to try to take care of me, even though I'm not your real daughter?" Marcus knelt beside her chair, meeting her earnest gaze. "Zara, family isn't just about who you're born to. Sometimes it's about who chooses to love you and who you choose to love back. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to try to be the father you deserve." The paperwork required to become Zara's temporary guardian resembled nothing so much as applying for a top-secret government clearance. Marcus sat at his dining room table, surrounded by forms that demanded everything from his financial statements dating back 7 years to character references from people who had known him for at least a decade. The Massachusetts Department of Children and Families wanted to know not just what he owned, but how he had acquired it, not just where he lived, but who had lived there with him and when, not just his current mental health status, but his complete psychological history. "It's like they're trying to discourage people from helping," Marcus muttered to himself as he filled out yet another form, requesting the same information he had already provided 3 times in slightly different formats. The home study process had begun with Linda Morrison arriving at his Beacon Hill mansion, accompanied by 2 other social workers, all carrying clipboards and wearing expressions of professional skepticism. They had measured rooms, photographed fire extinguishers, tested smoke detectors, and examined his refrigerator with the thoroughness of health inspectors at a restaurant outbreak. "The child will need her own bedroom," Morrison had noted, writing something on her clipboard that Marcus couldn't see. "Decorated age-appropriately, with adequate storage for clothes and personal belongings. Children who have experienced homelessness often hoard items initially, so extra storage space is advisable." Marcus had nodded along, taking mental notes, while wondering how many children Morrison had personally taken in, how many nights she had spent worrying about the safety and happiness of a traumatized 8-year-old. The guest bedroom on the 2nd floor already had its own bathroom and walk-in closet, but Marcus had spent the previous weekend shopping for furniture that would transform it from an elegant guest suite into a child's sanctuary. A white canopy, bed with soft pink linens, a desk for homework, bookshelves waiting to be filled with stories of adventure and wonder. The background check had been almost insulting in its comprehensiveness. Federal and state criminal records, credit reports, employment verification, medical examinations, and interviews with business associates who were suddenly very curious about Marcus's unexpected interest in child welfare. His ex-wife, Patricia, had been contacted, resulting in an awkward phone conversation during which she expressed surprise that someone she had considered incapable of emotional intimacy was attempting to raise a child. "I never thought you had it in you," she had said, not entirely unkindly. "Maybe this girl will bring out parts of yourself that I never got to see." While the bureaucratic wheels turned slowly, Marcus had arranged for Zara to move into his guest house, a converted carriage house behind the main mansion that provided privacy and independence while keeping her close enough for supervision and support. The space included a small kitchenette, a living area with a fireplace, and a bedroom that Zara had stared at in wonder when she first walked in. "This is all mine?" she had asked, running her hand over the quilt on the bed, testing the softness of pillows that had never known the weight of someone else's dreams. "All yours," Marcus had confirmed, watching as she carefully arranged her teddy bear on the pillow and placed her mother's letter in the bedside table drawer. The transformation in Zara's daily life had been remarkable to witness. For the first week, she had approached each new comfort with the wariness of someone expecting it to be withdrawn without notice. She would ask permission before taking food from the refrigerator, apologize for using hot water for her bath, and fold her dirty clothes with meticulous care, as if afraid that having too many would somehow revoke her right to be clean. Maria Santos, Marcus's housekeeper of 15 years, had become an unexpected bridge between Marcus's good intentions and Zara's practical needs. Her grandmother herself, Maria possessed an intuitive understanding of what a displaced child required, not just physical care, but the emotional security that came from routine and gentle boundaries. "She's like a little bird that fell from the nest," Maria had told Marcus in her musical Puerto Rican accent. "You feed her and keep her warm, but you also have to teach her she's safe enough to sing again." Maria had taken it upon herself to establish routines that gave Zara's days structure and predictability. Breakfast at 8, during which Maria would listen patiently to Zara's tentative attempts at conversation. Afternoon reading sessions, where Maria would sit nearby, mending clothes or folding laundry, while Zara worked through books from the local library. Evening conversations over hot chocolate, during which Zara gradually began to share memories of her mother, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she realized these stories were treasures rather than burdens. Marcus found himself marveling at Zara's intelligence and resilience. Despite 6 months out of school, she read at a level well above her grade, working through chapter books with the hungry efficiency of someone making up for lost time. When he brought her math worksheets to assess her academic standing, she completed problems that would challenge 5th graders, explaining her reasoning with clarity that suggested natural analytical ability. "Your mama must have been very smart," Marcus observed one evening as they worked through a particularly complex word problem together. "She said education was the one thing nobody could take away from you," Zara replied, chewing thoughtfully on her pencil eraser. "Even when we lost our apartment, even when we didn't have food sometimes, she made sure I kept reading and practicing the math." But the trauma of her experiences manifested in ways that broke Marcus's heart. The first night in the guest house, he had been awakened at 2 in the morning by screaming. He found Zara huddled in the corner of her bedroom, eyes open but unseeing, trapped in a nightmare where she was searching for her mother in an endless maze of dumpsters and abandoned buildings. "She's not here," Zara had sobbed when Marcus gently woke her. "I looked everywhere, but she's not here." "I know, sweetheart," Marcus had whispered, sitting on the edge of her bed while she gradually returned to the present. "I know she's not here, but you're safe now. You're not alone anymore." The nightmares came several times a week, sometimes accompanied by panic attacks when unexpected noises reminded her of the dangers she had faced on the streets. Marcus bought books on childhood trauma, consulted with child psychologists, and slowly learned to recognize the signs of triggers before they overwhelmed her completely. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the child psychiatrist recommended by his attorney, had been both reassuring and realistic in her assessment of Zara's needs. "She's remarkably resilient," Dr. Martinez had explained during their first consultation. "But she's also carrying trauma that will take time and patience to heal. The fact that she's beginning to trust you, that she's sleeping better and engaging in normal childhood activities, suggests she's already beginning to process her experiences in healthier ways." As January melted into February, Marcus watched Zara slowly unfurl like a flower receiving sunlight after a long winter. She began volunteering answers during their evening tutoring sessions rather than waiting to be asked. She started making jokes, tentative at first, then with growing confidence when she realized laughter was welcomed rather than discouraged. She asked questions about Marcus's work, showed interest in learning to cook simple meals with Maria, and began expressing opinions about everything from books to television shows to what flavor of ice cream was objectively superior. The custody paperwork accumulated in neat stacks on Marcus's desk, each form a step closer to making official what had already become true in his heart: that Zara belonged here, that they belonged together, that sometimes families were created not by biology, but by choice and commitment and love. The Boston Herald headline stretched across the front page of the Metro section: "Millionaire's Christmas Miracle. Local real estate mogul takes in homeless girl." Below it, a photograph that Marcus didn't remember being taken showed him and Zara walking hand in hand toward the entrance of the Children's Museum, both smiling, looking for all the world like father and daughter on a perfectly normal family outing. Marcus stared at the newspaper in his kitchen, coffee growing cold in his mug, while dread settled in his stomach like a stone. The article was surprisingly well researched, detailing his business success, his recent divorce, and what the reporter had characterized as his sudden transformation into an unlikely guardian angel. The journalist had somehow tracked down Linda Morrison, who had provided carefully worded quotes about the complexities of emergency guardianship, and had even managed to interview the owner of Bell's Diner, who remembered serving them that first night. "How did they find out?" Marcus muttered, scanning the article for clues about their source. The story read like something assembled from multiple tips. Someone at the hotel, perhaps, or a DCF employee who had recognized his name and connected it to his public profile. The phone began ringing before he finished reading. First his attorney, then his business partner, then his assistant, all asking the same questions. Was this true? Why hadn't he told them? What were the implications for Wellington properties? How should they handle media inquiries? By noon, 3 television news vans had parked outside his Beacon Hill mansion. Reporters with perfectly styled hair and wireless microphones positioned themselves on his sidewalk, offering breathless updates about the developing story of Boston's most eligible bachelor turned philanthropist. Marcus watched from his office window as Zara returned from her morning walk with Maria, her face a mask of confusion and growing panic as photographers emerged from bushes and reporters thrust microphones in her direction. "Zara! Zara Williams!" one reporter called out. "How does it feel to go from homeless to living in a mansion? Are you grateful to Mr. Wellington for saving you?" Maria's protective instincts kicked in immediately. She wrapped her arm around Zara's shoulders and pushed through the crowd of media personnel, firing rapid Spanish at anyone who got too close to her charge. But Marcus could see the damage was already done. Zara's face had gone pale, with the hunted expression of someone who had learned to be invisible for survival, only to find herself suddenly thrust into harsh spotlight. The guest house felt like a sanctuary when they finally reached it, doors locked, curtains drawn against the telephoto lenses that had turned Marcus's private garden into a fishbowl. Zara sat on her bed, clutching her teddy bear, staring at nothing, while Maria bustled around making tea with the fierce efficiency of someone channeling worry into action. "I don't like this," Zara said quietly. "I don't like people looking at me, asking questions, taking pictures." "I know," Marcus replied, sitting carefully on the edge of her bed. "I don't like it either. I never wanted this attention." But even as he said the words, he could see doubt creeping into Zara's eyes. The newspaper article lay folded on her nightstand, and he could tell she had read it, had absorbed the speculation about his motives, the suggestions that helping her might be good for his public image, the implication that wealthy men didn't typically take in homeless children unless they were getting something in return. The doubt festered over the following days as the story gained momentum on social media. Boston Miracle began trending, with thousands of people sharing opinions about Marcus's actions. Some praised his generosity and called for other wealthy individuals to follow his example. Others questioned his motives with the cynicism that had become endemic to public discourse, suggesting that no successful businessman would act without calculating the benefits to his reputation. The worst comments were the ones that speculated about more sinister reasons for his interest in Zara. Despite the complete absence of any evidence to support such theories, internet commentators felt free to invent elaborate conspiracies about his true intentions. Marcus had his IT manager remove these posts whenever possible, but new ones appeared faster than they could be deleted. Zara began withdrawing into herself, becoming quiet during their evening tutoring sessions and avoiding eye contact during meals. When Marcus tried to engage her in conversation, she would respond with monosyllables, her earlier enthusiasm for learning and growing replaced by the guarded wariness he remembered from their first meeting. "Are you doing this because you really want to help me?" she asked one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or are you doing it because it makes you look good?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Zara, everything I've done has been because I care about you. The media attention is something I never wanted, but now that you have it, are you going to keep it?" she pressed. "Are you going to keep talking to reporters and having your picture taken being nice to the poor little homeless girl?" Marcus realized that the sophisticated 8-year-old who had survived 6 months on the streets had also learned to read between the lines of adult behavior, to look for hidden agendas and ulterior motives. The media speculation had awakened her survival instincts, reminding her that adults often use children for their own purposes. His business associates hadn't helped matters. During a board meeting at Wellington Properties, several partners had made pointed comments about the interesting timing of his charitable activities, coming so soon after his divorce and during a period when his company was bidding on several high-profile development projects. The implication was clear that his guardianship of Zara was strategic, designed to soften his public image and demonstrate community responsibility. "Marcus, you have to understand how this looks," his longtime business partner James Morrison had said. "Successful businessman gets divorced, immediately takes in photogenic homeless child right before we're trying to win the Waterfront Commons contract. The optics are almost too convenient." The conversation had made Marcus question his own motivations. Was James right? Had some part of him, however unconsciously, calculated the public relations benefits of his actions? He searched his memory of that first night, trying to separate his genuine emotional response to Zara's situation from any possible consideration of how helping her might reflect on his character. But every time he doubted himself, he remembered the moment when Zara had shown him her mother's letter, remembered the trust in her eyes when she finally agreed to let him help, remembered the joy on her face when she realized she would have her own room, her own books, her own safe place in the world. The media circus reached its peak when Channel 5 scheduled what they called an exclusive in-depth interview about Marcus's motivations and Zara's transformation. The producer had called repeatedly, offering substantial compensation and promising to focus on the positive aspects of their story. It would be good publicity for your business, his public relations consultant had argued, and it might help other homeless children by raising awareness. But when Marcus mentioned the interview possibility to Zara, her reaction was swift and definitive. "No," she said, backing away from him as if he had suggested something dangerous. "I won't talk to them. I won't sit there and smile while they ask me about being homeless and hungry and scared. That's private. That's mine." Looking at her face, at the fear and betrayal warring with the hope that he would choose her privacy over his public image, Marcus made his decision. "You're absolutely right," he said, reaching for his phone. "I'm going to tell them no interviews, no pictures, no more stories. This is about you and me, not about them." For the first time in days, Zara smiled. "Really? Even if it would be good for your business?" "Zara," Marcus said, kneeling down to meet her eyes, "you are more important to me than any business. You are more important than what people think or say about me. You're my family now, and I protect my family." The cardboard box sat on Marcus's dining room table like an accusation waiting to be opened. Zara had finally agreed to let him help. Sort through her mother's belongings, the few possessions that had been stored in the basement of their former apartment building by a sympathetic landlord who had known Sarah Williams as a reliable tenant fallen on hard times. "Most of it's not worth keeping," Zara had said, with the matter-of-fact pragmatism that still broke Marcus's heart. "Mama didn't have much that was valuable, but maybe there are more pictures or some of her jewelry." The box contained the remnants of a life lived paycheck to paycheck, costume jewelry that had once made Sarah feel beautiful, romance novels with worn spines that had provided escape during difficult nights, a few DVDs of classic movies she had loved to watch with Zara on Sunday afternoons. Buried beneath layers of carefully folded clothes and personal mementos, Marcus found a manila envelope labeled "Important Papers" in Sarah's neat handwriting. Inside were the documents that people accumulate over a lifetime: birth certificates, social security cards, medical records, and employment history. Marcus was looking for insurance information that might help with outstanding medical bills when he found the folder marked Workers' Compensation Claim 2008-2009. The cover page made his blood run cold. Wellington Construction Company versus Sarah Williams, case number WC084471. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the file and began reading. Sarah Williams had worked for Wellington Construction for 8 months as a general laborer and equipment operator. On November 15, 2008, while operating a cement mixer on a residential construction site in Dorchester, she had been injured when a piece of improperly secured scaffolding had collapsed, crushing her left leg and causing permanent damage to her back. The medical reports painted a picture of devastating injury, multiple fractures, torn ligaments, nerve damage that would cause chronic pain for the rest of her life. Sarah had been hospitalized for 6 weeks and required 3 surgeries to repair the damage. The workers' compensation claim had been approved, providing medical coverage and temporary disability payments, but Marcus's hands shook as he read the correspondence between Sarah's attorney and his father's insurance company. The legal language was dry and clinical, but the human story beneath it was heartbreaking. Sarah had been 22 years old, recently pregnant with Zara, unmarried and without family support. The injury had ended her ability to perform physical labor, limiting her to part-time work in positions that wouldn't aggravate her back condition. The workers' compensation settlement had provided a modest lump sum payment and ongoing medical coverage, but it had also included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented Sarah from discussing the circumstances of her injury or the adequacy of the settlement. Marcus found himself staring at his father's signature on the final settlement documents, remembering James Wellington as a man of integrity who had always preached fairness and responsibility toward his workers. But the file told a different story, of legal maneuvering designed to minimize liability, of medical evaluations that seemed calculated to downplay the severity of Sarah's injuries, of a settlement amount that might have seemed generous to a frightened 22-year-old, but was clearly inadequate for someone facing a lifetime of limited earning capacity and chronic pain. The final document in the file was a letter from Sarah to Wellington Construction, written 6 months after the settlement. In it, she explained that her medical costs were exceeding the coverage provided, that she was struggling to find employment that accommodated her physical limitations, and that she was requesting additional assistance to help care for her newborn daughter. The response had come not from James Wellington, but from the company's attorney. A formal letter explaining that the settlement agreement was final and that the company had no further legal or financial obligations to Ms. Williams. The letter was professional, legally correct, and utterly devoid of compassion. Marcus sat in his dining room, surrounded by the artifacts of Sarah Williams's difficult life, and felt the weight of inherited guilt settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. The wealth that had enabled him to build Wellington Properties, the capital that had launched his real estate empire, had come from his father's construction company. James Wellington had been a good man, but he had also been a businessman operating in a system that prioritized profit over people, legal compliance over moral obligation. Sarah Williams had worked for his family's company. She had been injured while helping to build the foundation of the Wellington fortune. And when she needed help the most, young, disabled, caring for an infant daughter, that same company had hidden behind legal technicalities and walked away from any responsibility for her future. The irony was devastating. Zara's mother had known exactly who Marcus was from the beginning. The newspaper coverage of his business success had featured his photograph, identified him as the son of Wellington Construction's founder. Sarah had recognized his name, understood the connection between her injury and his wealth, and had chosen to struggle in poverty rather than approach the family whose company had contributed to her circumstances. Pride, Marcus realized. The same. Fierce independence that Zara had inherited from her mother had prevented Sarah from seeking help from the Wellingtons, had kept her working 2 jobs while battling chronic pain rather than asking for assistance from people she might have viewed as owing her a debt. Marcus was still sitting at the table, staring at the workers' compensation file when Zara returned from her afternoon session with Dr. Martinez. She looked healthier than she had in weeks. The media attention had finally died down, and her nightmares had become less frequent. She was laughing at something Maria had said when she walked into the dining room and saw the expression on Marcus's face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, her smile fading. "What did you find?" Marcus closed the file, but Zara had already seen the Wellington Construction logo on the cover page. Her face went very still, and he watched her mind working through the implications with the sharp intelligence that had helped her survive on the streets. "My mama worked for your family," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "That's how. You knew to find me. That's why you really helped me." "Zara, it's not that simple. Did you know?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "When you saw me that night, did you know who I was?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "I had no idea about any of this until just now. I helped you because you needed help, not because of any connection to your mother." But he could see the doubt in her eyes, the same wariness that had appeared during the media circus. Zara was processing this new information through the lens of a child who had learned that adults often had hidden agendas, that kindness rarely came without strings attached. "So, this whole time," she said, her voice getting smaller, "you've been feeling guilty about my mama, taking care of me because your family owed us something." The accusation cut deep because it contained enough truth to sting. Marcus did feel guilty, not about helping Zara, but about the fact that his comfortable life had been built partially on the labor of people like Sarah Williams. People who had sacrificed their health and future earning capacity to make the Wellington fortune. Possible? Zara, listen to me, he said, standing up and moving toward her, but she backed away. What I found in these papers doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change the fact that I love you like my own daughter, but it changes why you love me, Zara replied, tears starting to flow. It makes me a debt instead of a daughter. Words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level, searching for the right words to repair damage he hadn't even known he was causing. Zara, you're not a debt. You're not something I'm doing to make up for the past. You're the best thing that has ever happened to me. You've taught me what it means to be a father, what it means to love someone more than yourself. But if you hadn't found out about Mama working for your daddy, would you still want me? She asked, the question holding all the insecurity of a child who had already lost everything once. Marcus took her hands in his, feeling their smallness and warmth, remembering the first night when she had trusted him enough to share her mother's letter. Zara, I wanted you before I knew about your mother's connection to my family. I wanted you when all I knew was that you were brave and smart and kind. I wanted you when you were just a little girl who needed someone to care about her. He paused, searching her face. But learning about your mother's story does change something. It helps me understand that maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe your mother's strength and your courage led us to each other. Zara studied his face for a long moment, searching for truth in his expression. You really didn't know. When you first saw me, I swear to you I didn't know. But now that I do know, it makes me even more certain that we belong together, not because of guilt or obligation, but because sometimes the universe finds ways to heal old wounds and make things right. The tension in Zara's shoulders began to ease slightly, but Marcus could see that this revelation would require time to fully process. The simple story of a wealthy man helping a homeless child had become more complex, a story about inherited responsibility, about the ways that past actions echo through generations, about how sometimes justice and love arrive, wearing the same face. Can I keep the papers? Zara asked finally. The ones about Mama. Of course, Marcus replied. They're part of your history, part of understanding who she was and what she went through. As Zara carefully gathered the documents, Marcus realized that their relationship had just evolved again. They were no longer just a guardian and his ward, no longer just a wealthy man and the child he had chosen to help. They were connected by threads that stretched back 15 years, bound together by circumstances that neither had fully understood until now. The question was whether this connection would strengthen their bond or complicate it beyond repair. The adoption papers lay spread across Robert Chen's conference table like a roadmap to a future that Marcus was still learning to envision. Unlike the emergency guardianship documents that had been primarily about immediate safety and temporary care, these forms represented permanence, a legal declaration that he intended to be Zara's father, not just through the current crisis, but for life. Adoption is irreversible, Chen explained, his tone carrying the weight of legal and emotional gravity. Once these papers are signed and approved by the court, Zara becomes your daughter in every legal sense. Same inheritance rights as a biological child, same parental obligations on your part, same family relationships that extend to your entire extended family. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on Zara, who sat beside him studying the documents with the serious expression she wore when processing something important. At 9 now, she had turned 9 2 weeks ago in a celebration that had involved homemade cake, too many presents, and the first birthday party she could remember attending where she was the guest of honor. Zara had developed the habit of reading everything thoroughly before making decisions. What does this part mean? She asked, pointing to a section about termination of parental rights for biological relatives. Chen leaned forward, addressing Zara directly with the respect he had learned she both expected and deserved. It means that if any biological family members were ever discovered, grandparents, aunts, uncles you didn't know about, They wouldn't have automatic legal rights to take you away from Marcus. You would legally be his daughter, and this would be your permanent home. Zara nodded slowly, then looked at Marcus with an expression that was part hope, part terror. And you can't change your mind later, even if I'm difficult or expensive or embarrassing? The question broke Marcus's heart, as so many of Zara's questions did. Even after nearly a year of stability, she still carried the fear of abandonment, still questioned whether any love in her life would prove conditional. I can't change my mind, and I wouldn't want to, Marcus replied firmly. When you adopt someone, when you choose to make them your family, that's permanent. That's forever. The formal adoption process had begun 3 months earlier, after weeks of conversations between Marcus and Zara about what permanent family would mean for both of them. The legal requirements were even more extensive than the guardianship process had been. Additional home studies, psychological evaluations for both of them, interviews with teachers and neighbors and anyone who had observed their relationship develop. Dr. Martinez had been particularly thorough in her assessment of their readiness for permanent placement. Her sessions with Zara had explored the child's attachment patterns, her ability to trust and be trusted, her understanding of what family commitment meant after her experiences with loss. Zara has formed a secure attachment to Marcus, Dr. Martinez had reported to the court. She demonstrates age-appropriate trust, seeks comfort from him when distressed, and has developed healthy boundaries within their relationship. Most importantly, she has begun to internalize the belief that she is worthy of permanent love and care. The psychological evaluation had been more challenging for Marcus, requiring him to examine his own motivations and capacity for long-term parenthood with unflinching honesty. The court-appointed psychologist had been particularly interested in his response to stress, his ability to prioritize Zara's needs over his business interests, and his understanding of the unique challenges involved in raising a child who had experienced significant trauma. Mr. Wellington demonstrates genuine commitment to Zara's welfare, the psychologist had concluded. He has educated himself about childhood trauma, adjusted his lifestyle to prioritize her stability, and shown consistent emotional availability over the past year. While he lacks traditional parenting experience, he has proven adaptable and responsive to professional guidance. The community response to their adoption plans had been overwhelmingly positive. Once the media attention had died down and people had time to observe their relationship without the distortion of sensational headlines, Zara's teachers at the private school where Marcus had enrolled her spoke glowingly of her academic progress and social development. The parents of her classmates had welcomed her into birthday parties and playdates, treating her not as a charity case, but as simply another child in their social circle. The academic testing required for school placement had revealed what Marcus had already suspected. Zara possessed exceptional intelligence that had been temporarily derailed by circumstances but never damaged. Her scores in reading comprehension and mathematical reasoning placed her in the 97th percentile. Nationally, leading to conversations about accelerated programs and scholarship opportunities for her future education. She's what we call a stealth-gifted child, explained Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the educational consultant who had administered Zara's tests. Her intelligence was masked by the survival mode she lived in for so long, but now that she feels safe and stable, her natural capabilities are emerging rapidly. The test results had opened discussions about Zara's long-term educational path, including the possibility of attending elite preparatory schools that could provide the intellectual challenge she needed. Several institutions had already expressed interest in offering scholarships, viewing Zara as exactly the kind of resilient, high-achieving student they wanted in their programs. "I want to go to MIT," Zara had announced one evening during dinner, with the casual confidence of someone who had already decided her future. I want to study engineering and learn how to build things that help people. The pronouncement had filled Marcus with pride and terror in equal measure. Pride in her ambition and confidence. Terror at the thought of guiding someone with such potential through the complexities of achieving those dreams. Meeting Marcus's extended family had been another milestone in their journey toward official adoption. His cousins from New York had visited for a long weekend, bringing their own children and treating Zara with the casual acceptance that comes when adults decide to focus on what unites rather than what distinguishes. The reactions had been more mixed among his business associates and social circle. Some friends had embraced Zara warmly, including her in family gatherings and treating her adoption as a cause for celebration. Others had maintained polite distance, unclear how to relate to this child who didn't fit their expectations of how wealthy families were typically formed. The most difficult conversation had come with Patricia, his ex-wife, during one of her rare visits to Boston. She had met Zara over lunch at a neutral restaurant, and the three of them had navigated an awkward but ultimately productive conversation about family dynamics and future relationships. "You're different with her," Patricia had observed later when she and Marcus spoke privately. "More patient, more present. It's like she brings out parts of yourself that you never accessed before." "Maybe that's what being a parent is supposed to do," Marcus had replied. "Maybe it's supposed to make you become the person your child needs you to be." As December approached and the first anniversary of their meeting drew near, both Marcus and Zara found themselves reflecting on how completely their lives had changed. The guest house had become truly Zara's space, filled with books and art supplies and the accumulated treasures of a child who no longer worried about losing everything she owned. The main house had been subtly transformed as well, child-proofed, where necessary, but more importantly, filled with the sounds and rhythms of family life. The final legal hurdle had been the most emotionally challenging. Judge Catherine Morrison, no relation to the social worker, had scheduled a private interview with Zara to ensure that the adoption was truly in her best interests and that she understood the permanent nature of the decision being made. "Zara," Judge Morrison had asked during their session in her chambers, "do you understand that if I approve this adoption, Marcus will legally be your father forever, even if you disagree or argue or go through difficult times together?" "Yes, ma'am," Zara had replied with characteristic seriousness. "But families disagree sometimes. That doesn't mean they stop loving each other. And you're certain this is what you want? You've had almost a year to think about it." Zara had looked at Marcus, then back at the judge, her expression thoughtful. "My mama used to say that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who chooses to love you and stick with you no matter what. Marcus has stuck with me through everything. He's already my daddy in all the ways that matter. The papers. Just make it official." Now, sitting in Robert Chen's office with the final adoption papers ready for signature, Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a warm blanket. For nearly a year, he had been operating on instinct and love, making decisions day by day about what was best for Zara. The adoption would formalize what had already become true in his heart, that she was his daughter, that they were family, that their commitment to each other was permanent and unconditional. "Are you ready?" he asked Zara, pen poised over the signature line. Zara looked at him with eyes that held none of the wariness or doubt that had characterized their early relationship. Instead, she smiled with the confidence of someone who had finally found her. "Place in the world? I've been ready since the night you bought me soup and let me keep Mama's letter," she said. "I just needed time to believe it was real." Marcus signed his name with a steady hand, followed by Zara's careful signature on the line marked "Minor Child Consent." Robert Chen added his witness signature, and with those simple actions, they became officially what they had already become. In truth, father and daughter, family by choice rather than biology, bound together by love rather than circumstance. The adoption papers represented more than legal formality. They were a promise, a commitment, a declaration that some bonds transcend the circumstances that create them and become stronger than anything that might try to break them. The Suffolk County Family Court courtroom felt surprisingly intimate for such a momentous occasion. Judge Catherine Morrison's chambers had been chosen over the formal courtroom to make the proceedings less intimidating for Zara, and the space held only the essential participants: Marcus and Zara, Robert Chen, Linda Morrison from DCF, and Dr. Martinez as the court's appointed child advocate. Zara wore her favorite purple dress, the one Marcus had bought her for her 9th birthday, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity that had characterized her throughout their year together. Her hands were steady as she placed her palm on the bailiff's Bible and promised to tell the truth, and her voice was clear when Judge Morrison asked her the questions that would determine their future. "Zara, do you understand why we're here today?" Judge Morrison asked gently. "Yes, ma'am. Marcus wants to adopt me, and I want him to be my legal father. Can you tell me why you want this adoption to happen?" Zara took a deep breath, the same way she did before difficult math problems or challenging reading assignments. "Marcus has taken care of me for almost a year now. He makes sure I'm safe and fed and that I go to school. But more than that, he listens to me when I'm scared or sad. He helps me remember my mama without being jealous of her memory, and he keeps his promises." Judge Morrison made notes as Zara spoke, occasionally nodding. "What promises has he kept?" "He promised I would never be hungry again, and I haven't been. He promised I would have my own room and my own books, and I do. But the most important promise was that he wouldn't leave me, even when things were hard or when people said mean things in the newspapers. He kept that promise too." "Are there things about living with Marcus that you don't like?" Zara considered this question seriously, the way she approached everything. "Sometimes he worries too much about me, like when I want to walk to the library by myself, and he doesn't know how to braid hair very well, so Maria has to help with that. But those aren't big things. If I approve this adoption, Marcus will be your father forever, legally and emotionally. Even if you move away for college someday, even if you get married and have your own children, he will always be your father. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am. That's what I want. I want to belong somewhere forever." The judge turned to Marcus, her expression shifting to address the adult responsibilities inherent in permanent guardianship. "Mr. Wellington, please tell the court why you believe this adoption is in Zara's best interests." Marcus stood, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "Your Honor, when I first met Zara, I thought I was helping her. But over this past year, I've come to understand that she's been helping me just as much. She's taught me what it means to put someone else's needs before your own, what it means to love unconditionally, what it means to be truly responsible for another person's welfare and happiness." He looked at Zara, who smiled encouragingly. "I can provide for her financially, ensure she receives the best education possible, give her opportunities I never had. But more importantly, I can give her the stability and love she deserves. I can be the father she needs, not just for now, but for the rest of her life." "What do you see as the challenges of raising a child who has experienced trauma and loss?" "I understand that Zara's early experiences will always be part of who she is," Marcus replied. "I've learned about trauma responses, about the importance of consistency and patience. I know there will be difficult days, setbacks, moments when the past intrudes on the present. But I also know that with professional support, with love and stability, children can heal and thrive despite difficult beginnings." Judge Morrison reviewed her notes, consulted with the bailiff briefly, then looked at both Marcus and Zara with an expression that had shifted from judicial evaluation to human warmth. "Based on the extensive documentation provided, the testimony I've heard today, and the clear evidence of a strong, healthy attachment between Mr. Wellington and Zara, I hereby approve this adoption petition." She smiled as Zara's face lit up with joy. Marcus Wellington, you are now officially Zara's father, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Zara Williams Wellington, you are officially part of the Wellington family. The transformation was immediate and profound. What had been a temporary arrangement, however loving, had become permanent legal reality. Zara was no longer a homeless child being helped by a generous stranger. She was Marcus Wellington's daughter, with a family name, legal protections, and the security of knowing she belonged somewhere forever. Robert Chen had arranged for a photographer to document the moment when Judge Morrison handed them the signed adoption decree, capturing the tears of joy on both their faces as they hugged in the courthouse hallway. The image would later become the centerpiece of a follow-up article in the Boston Herald, this time focusing not on speculation about motives, but on the successful completion of an extraordinary journey. Later that afternoon, back at the Beacon Hill mansion, Marcus presented Zara with a small velvet box. Inside was a house key polished to a bright shine and engraved with the words, "Home Forever." "This is yours," he said, placing the key in her palm. "Not as a guest, not as someone we're helping temporarily, but as my daughter, as someone who belongs here always." Zara turned the key over in her hands, feeling its weight, understanding its significance. For someone who had spent months carrying everything she owned in the pockets of an oversized coat, having a key to a permanent home represented security beyond measure. The celebration that evening was exactly what both Marcus and Zara had hoped for, intimate rather than elaborate, focused on the people who had supported them through their journey rather than public recognition. Maria had prepared Zara's favorite dinner. Dr. Martinez had stopped by with congratulations, and a handful of neighbors and friends had gathered to witness the official beginning of the Wellington family. As Zara fell asleep that night in her own bedroom, in her own house, carrying her own key to a future that was now legally secured, she held her mother's letter close to her heart. Sarah Williams had been right. There were good people in the world who would help if you let them, people who could see your light and choose to nurture it rather than exploit it. The homeless child digging through dumpsters on Christmas Eve was now Zara Wellington, daughter and heir to a man who had learned that the greatest wealth was not what you accumulated, but what you shared with those you loved. The 12-foot Fraser fir stood in the Wellington mansion's front parlor like a monument to new beginnings, its branches heavy with an eclectic mixture of expensive ornaments Marcus had collected over the years and handmade decorations that Zara had been crafting for weeks in preparation for their first official Christmas as father and daughter. "This one goes right here," Zara announced, standing on a step stool to hang her latest creation near the top of the tree. The ornament was made from construction paper, glue, and more glitter than Maria had initially approved of, shaped like a house with tiny windows cut out and tissue paper glued behind them to create the illusion of warm light glowing from within. "Tell me about this one," Marcus requested, settling into the armchair that had become his designated spot for supervising tree decorating operations. Over the past year, he had learned that Zara's creative projects always came with stories, elaborate narratives that revealed as much about her inner world as they did about her artistic vision. "It's our house," Zara explained, adding a final touch of silver glitter to the paper roof. "But it's also every house where kids like me finally get to stay forever. See the light in the windows? That's love. Mama used to say you could tell if a house was really a home by whether it glowed from the inside." The ornament joined dozens of others that Zara had created over the past month. Paper angels with carefully drawn faces that looked suspiciously like Sarah Williams, candy cane reindeer with googly eyes and red ribbon antlers, snowflakes cut from old sheet music that she had found in Marcus's piano bench and convinced him to let her repurpose for art. Marcus watched his daughter work with the concentrated focus she brought to everything important, marveling at how completely she had transformed not just his house, but his entire understanding of what home could mean. The mansion that had once echoed with expensive silence now rang with laughter, music lessons, and the daily negotiations that came with sharing space with someone whose priorities included adequate time for reading, regular phone calls with her best friend Katie from school, and an elaborate bedtime routine that involved reading at least 2 chapters of whatever book had captured her current attention. Balancing his business responsibilities with fatherhood had required more adjustment than Marcus had anticipated. Wellington properties still demanded attention, but he had learned to delegate more effectively, to prioritize meetings that couldn't be rescheduled around Zara's school events, and to work from home on days when she was sick or simply needed more parental presence than usual. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been awkward moments during important client meetings when Zara had burst through his home office door with urgent questions about math homework or requests for permission to have friends over for study sessions. But Marcus had discovered that most people responded positively to evidence that he was actively parenting, that his priorities had evolved to include school plays and parent-teacher conferences alongside quarterly earnings reports. His extended family had embraced Zara with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but even the initially skeptical relatives had been won over by her intelligence, curiosity, and the obvious happiness she brought to Marcus's life. His cousin David's children, visiting from Connecticut for Christmas week, had immediately accepted Zara as their newest cousin, including her in their elaborate plans for Christmas morning present opening strategies and New Year's Eve celebration. Schemes. Uncle Marcus is different now, Marcus had overheard his 10-year-old nephew explaining to Zara. He used to be all serious and businesslike, but now he actually knows how to have fun. The observation had been both accurate and revelatory. Marcus was different, more patient, more present, more willing to prioritize moments of connection over efficiency and productivity. Fatherhood had taught him to find joy in small victories. Zara's A+ on a particularly challenging science test, her first successful attempt at riding the bicycle he had bought her for her birthday, the evening when she had finally felt comfortable enough to cry in his arms about missing her mother without feeling guilty for being happy in her new life. At Pemberton Academy, the private school where Zara was now enrolled, she had blossomed both academically and socially. Her teachers reported that she demonstrated exceptional aptitude in mathematics and science, but more importantly, that she had developed genuine friendships with classmates who valued her intelligence and kindness rather than viewing her background as a source of curiosity or pity. "She's become one of our natural leaders," her 4th-grade teacher had reported during the fall parent conference. "The other children look up to her resilience and her willingness to help anyone who's struggling. She has a gift for making others feel included and valued." The community recognition had been gratifying, but Marcus had discovered far less important than the private moments when Zara would spontaneously hug him and whisper, "I love you, Daddy," or when she would seek his advice about friendship problems or share her dreams about becoming an engineer who designed buildings that could help homeless families find permanent housing. Christmas morning dawned crisp and bright, with snow falling gently outside the mansion's tall windows. Zara had woken Marcus at precisely 7 o'clock, not earlier, because they had agreed on a reasonable hour, but not a moment later, because her excitement could barely be contained. The present exchange had been everything Marcus had hoped for and more. Zara's gifts to him were homemade treasures, a scarf she had knitted in his favorite blue, a photo album filled with pictures from their first year together, and a card with a message written in her careful handwriting. "Thank you for being the best daddy, and for proving that sometimes miracles come in the shape of regular people who just decide to care." His gifts to her reflected both her practical needs and her evolving interests. Advanced science textbooks that would challenge her academically, art supplies for her creative projects, and a beautiful wooden jewelry box where she could keep her mother's ring and other precious mementos. But the most meaningful moment came when Zara presented Marcus with her final handmade ornament, one she had kept secret until Christmas morning. It was a star made from gold construction paper with their family photo glued in the center and the words "Forever Family" written in glitter around the edge. "This goes at the very top," she announced, climbing carefully onto his shoulders so she could place it at the tree's peak. "Because we're the most important part of Christmas now. We're each other's family." As Marcus steadied her small form and watched her place the star with ceremonious care, he realized that this moment, this perfect synthesis of past and present, loss and gain, individual journeys converging into shared future, was exactly what his father had meant about success, being measured in contribution rather than accumulation. He had contributed to Zara's life, yes, but she had contributed infinitely more to his, transforming him from a wealthy man into a rich one, teaching him the difference between having everything and having what mattered most. The graduation program from Boston Latin Academy was printed on heavy cream-colored paper, and Marcus studied it for the 100th time as he waited for the ceremony to begin. Under valedictorian address, it read, "Zara Wellington, the mathematics of compassion, how one person's kindness creates infinite possibilities." 5 years had transformed the frightened 8-year-old he had found digging through a dumpster into the poised young woman now preparing to address her graduating class. At 13, Zara had skipped 2 grades based on her exceptional academic performance. Now at 17, she was heading to MIT in the fall on a full scholarship, her childhood dream of becoming an engineer finally within reach. Marcus adjusted his tie and looked around the packed auditorium, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. In the 5 years since their first Christmas together as an official family, Zara had not merely survived the transition from homelessness to privilege. She had thrived, using every opportunity to grow stronger, smarter, and more determined. To make her mark on the world, the academic achievements were impressive, but not surprising to anyone who knew Zara well. National Honor Society, captain of the debate team, editor of the school newspaper, volunteer tutor for struggling students. Her teachers consistently described her as the kind of student who elevated everyone around her, who combined intellectual brilliance with emotional maturity and an unwavering commitment to helping others succeed. But it was the personal growth that filled Marcus with the deepest pride. The wariness that had once characterized Zara's interactions with new people had evolved into confident warmth. The girl, who had once hoarded food and possessions, now shared everything she had with characteristic generosity. The child who had learned to be invisible for survival had become a natural leader who used her voice to advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. "Ladies and gentlemen," the principal announced from the podium, "please welcome your valedictorian, Zara Wellington." Marcus watched his daughter walk across the stage with the grace and confidence that had become second nature to her. She wore her graduation cap at a slight angle, the same way she had worn her winter hat that first night they met, and her smile radiated the happiness of someone who had never forgotten how precious security and opportunity were because she had lived without them. "When I was 8 years old," Zara began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system, "I thought I understood mathematics. I knew that 2 + 2 = 4, that multiplication was faster than repeated addition, and that if you had $5 and spent 3, you had 2 left over." She paused, scanning the audience until her eyes found Marcus in the 3rd row. "But I didn't understand the most important mathematical principle of all, that compassion multiplies exponentially. When one person chooses kindness, when one person decides to act on empathy instead of walking away, the equation changes everything." Zara's speech wove together her personal story with broader themes about social responsibility, about the obligation of those who had been given much to share with those who had little. She spoke about her mother's influence, about lessons in dignity and perseverance that no amount of formal education could replace. She spoke about Marcus, about how his decision to stop his car on Christmas Eve had created ripple effects that continued to expand years later. "My father taught me that success isn't about what you accumulate," she continued, and Marcus felt his throat tighten at the casual way she claimed him, the complete absence of qualification or explanation. "Success is about what you contribute. It's about using your privileges and opportunities to create more privileges and opportunities for others." The speech concluded with Zara's announcement of her summer plans. Instead of the prestigious internships and European travel programs her classmates would pursue, she was returning to Boston's shelter system as a volunteer, working with homeless children to provide tutoring, mentorship, and proof that circumstances don't determine destiny. During the reception following graduation, Marcus found himself surrounded by parents and faculty who wanted to congratulate him on raising such an exceptional young woman. Their praise was well-intentioned, but felt somehow misplaced. He hadn't raised Zara so much as provided her with the stability and resources to become who she was always meant to be. Wellington properties had continued to grow and prosper during Zara's high school years, but Marcus's relationship with his business success had fundamentally changed. The company's mission had expanded beyond profit maximization to include community development projects focused on affordable housing and homeless services. The Wellington Foundation, established 3 years earlier, provided scholarships specifically for homeless and formerly homeless youth, giving other children the same opportunities that Zara had received. "Daddy," Zara said, appearing at his elbow with 2 cups of punch and the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully navigated hours of congratulations and well wishes. "Are you ready for our tradition?" Their tradition had begun in previous Christmas Eve and had become one of Marcus's most treasured annual rituals. Together, they would drive to the warehouse district where they had first met, bringing food, blankets, and gift cards to distribute to anyone they found struggling on the streets. It was Zara's idea, her way of honoring both her mother's memory and the moment that had changed both their lives. This year, they found a family, a mother with 2 young children, taking shelter in the same doorway where Zara had once slept. The woman was wary initially, suspicious of their motives, but Zara's gentle persistence and obvious understanding of the situation gradually broke through her defenses. "I used to sleep right over there," Zara explained, pointing to the abandoned textile factory. "When I was your daughter's age. I know how scary it can be, how hard it is to trust people who want to help." By the end of their conversation, the family had accepted emergency hotel vouchers, contact information for social services, and Zara's personal phone number with instructions to call if they needed anything at all. Driving home through the December night, Marcus reflected on the mathematical precision of life's unexpected equations. One moment of compassion on a cold Christmas Eve had multiplied into a lifetime of purpose, a legacy that would continue expanding through every child Zara helped, every policy she influenced, every life she touched with her particular combination of intelligence and empathy. "Thank you," Zara said quietly as they pulled into their driveway. "For what? For stopping the car that night, for seeing me as someone worth saving instead of a problem to avoid, for teaching me that family is something you choose and build together." Marcus looked at his daughter, brilliant, compassionate, determined to use her advantages in service of others, and realized that his father had been right about success all along. The greatest treasure wasn't what you accumulated, but what you contributed. And the most valuable contribution wasn't money or property, but love freely given to someone who needed it most. The graduation program would be framed and hung in Marcus's office, a reminder that sometimes the most important mathematics involved measuring not what you could calculate, but what you couldn't. The infinite value of human kindness and the exponential power of love to transform lives.